And now, I'm going to say, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Carsten to the stage. You on? Okay. You may need to feel a little bit higher. Let's try that.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Thumbs up.
Okay. So, Carsten, I would really like you to just very briefly introduce yourself and then say just a couple of sentences about your deepest belief about what it is you're going to be talking about this morning.
With pleasure. I am currently serving as the Global Head of Human Resources at the World Economic Forum. I moved from the corporate environment where I spent the last 12 years of my life working for a huge 400,000 people business company called Daimler Chrysler. So I switched from the industry to the non-for-profit sector 4 years ago. And the fantastic beauty about the job that I have is not only working with these incredible people that work in and through and with the forum, but also to get to speak to people like you and have occasions like this one. So I'm very thankful for being here today. Which brings us to the question that you asked me. So I truly believe that we are at a point where the way that we interact with each other, the way that we collaborate with each other, the need to collaborate, to be more mindful, to be more aware of what is going on around us, is very different from what it used to be. We can no longer continue doing what we used to do. Something has to give, and which is why I'm here. I have to excite you.
Okay, I'll give you Carsten.
Thank you, sir.
The answer you give to the question, what is leadership, is not just a philosophical answer. It's a very consequential answer. Because the image we have in our mind, of course, drives the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act in the world.
Leadership is the capacity to obviously engage and inspire, but also the capacity to have a sense of purpose that embodies some of the challenges the world is facing.
They have a role not only as an individual contributor, but as someone who has to care about the system.
Look at today's world, it's such an interconnected world. Today's young professionals who want to become leaders, what they need to do is to understand how to influence people through a variety of new mechanisms, and really understand how to lead horizontally and vertically.
It's all about how do you invent and reinvent yourself and invent and reinvent the contribution you want to make to society.
You have to use your intuition, you have to use your aesthetic sense, you have to have really amazing skills with people, and you have to be attuned to people.
It's really about very, very good coordination skills, but also some degree of inspiration and vision, how they can inspire and get people to put their creative energies behind some activity.
The characteristics of a good leader would be someone who has a wonderful capacity for listening and really trying to understand what do people care about. It entails someone who's willing to actually move forward and to move with the interests of the people, to move with the interests that are there. That takes a savvy person, a courageous person, and a person who is able to really listen and understand.
You have no idea how excited I am to be speaking to you today. What a great chance, and thank you for having me. I'll be speaking about the new models of leadership. You see that on the board behind me. And I arrived yesterday afternoon, just in time to see 600 of you doing a couple of roll calls. Pretty impressive, I must say. I tried to do it in my room yesterday evening, but I leave it to you. The topic of the new models of leadership fits perfectly well to those three key themes that we have chosen for this year's Y2B conference: innovation, entrepreneurship, and corporate responsibility. And so, if you are aspiring to take on a leadership role, you have just assumed a leadership role lately, or you're just simply interested in gaining further perspective about how to lead, then please join me on a journey in which I will try and draw a picture of the backdrop against which leadership is taking place today, and tomorrow, and the picture that I'll try and draw about the role that you have, the role that I have, in creating this eco-space that is necessary to really generate the levels of collaboration, of mindfulness, and of togetherness that are needed to solve the problems that the world has today and tomorrow. Well, today's leaders are struggling with a myriad of different problems, be they ecologic, be it societal, be it transformational, be it geopolitical, be it economic, whatever. It is no longer possible to believe that an economic problem in one region will stay confined to that one region and not spread across the world. Likewise, it is not possible to believe that an environmental risk will not reverberate across the world, because it will. If you think back about a year and a half ago, the seemingly global catastrophe, the one in Fukushima, reverberated across the entire world with significant negative impact on the entire global supply chain. Now the underlying system, or the concept here, is systemic connectivity, which means that the choice or the decisions of a leader are not only dependent or subject to the leader's own choices, but also to the choices of other leaders around the world, maybe in very different locations. And that is different than what it used to be, because in former times, the leader, whoever that might have been, was focusing on his or her immediate environment and did not have to deal with global problems or issues of transformational nature. So one could speak of a quantum change that is happening, and let me try and draw this picture for you. Imagine yourself as a leader. Imagine yourself as a leader today or tomorrow in larger roles. Now this poor leader has to think about it, because he has to think about, for instance, resource scarcity. Well, we know about financial resource scarcity, and we know about natural resource scarcity. But there's another one which is coming up, and that's you guys, talent resource scarcity. You could say, well, I mean, there's so many people around, what's this guy talking about talent resource scarcity? Well, if you put yourself in the shoes of the leader, that leader has to understand, what do I have to do to make sure that I attract you guys to come and work for me? And what does it take me as a leader to actually then retain you? What is it as a leader that I have to do to excite you, to motivate you, to make you happy, to develop you, to coach you, to give you feedback? All these things have to happen in the brain of another leader. The demographic and the societal shifts. We heard about it this morning, we heard about it yesterday. We are all aging, some faster than others it seems, but as a general rule we are all aging. And you see organizations now employing the 60, 65, 70, maybe 72-year-old on the one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum you have you guys, the 19, 20, 22, 24-year-old. Now this poor leader has to find ways to mitigate the needs and wants and the desires of these very different generations. What does the leader have to do to really understand what these generations want? How does the leader have to behave to bridge the gap between these different generations? New technologies and swarm clouds. Now, with the invention of the internet and open source platforms and swarm cloud environments, we see that the command and control structures that are still heavily existing in large organizations, they're losing their exclusivity. Instead, open source platforms and swarm cloud environments are creating a push from control at the center to creativity at the periphery. And obviously we know that social media is a great tool because you communicate to your peers and to your colleagues instantaneously. The feedback loops are shortened in their time from weeks to minutes, and you have great chances of generating feedback. On the other hand, we know also that it takes nearly 140-character posts on Twitter to destroy a leader's reputation. Globalization, interdependence, and virtualization is the next dimension that I'd like to speak about. So while the internet is providing an abundance of real-time information, it is also creating a new culture in which large groups of individuals are engaged in dialogue and in decision-making. Information, experience, and knowledge, it seems, can be transferred at the click of a button. More and more work, we know, is done by teams rather than individuals, and the speed and pressure to innovate is skyrocketing. But what about this virtualization? Now, that's causing further headache to this poor leader. Imagine I am a leader, I sit in location A, and my people sit in location B, C, and D. Now, what do I need to do as a leader to make sure that my vision, my ideas, and my strategy actually not only gets communicated to these people, but that these people actually understand it and buy in? And on the flip side of that, what do I need to do? What behavior do I need to show to open these people up, to co-design innovation with me, to trust me, to feedback to me, and help me run the team? The fifth dimension is the turmoil in the financial sector and what some could call the absence of global governance. Recent events highlight in a pretty dramatic way how interdependent and complex our world has become. And we also can see that ambiguity and complexity are now part of every planning scenario. And last but not least, it's a beautiful rainbow at the end, my personal favorite, the emergence of super wicked problems. Has anybody heard that term before? It's stuff like small things like climate change, world hunger, global supply chain problems, and so on. Now these issues, these problems, are so huge, and their potential negative impact on society is so dramatic that no individual by himself, by herself, can solve it. So as a consequence, these scenarios are creating an incredible push for unity, for collaboration, for innovation, for entrepreneurship, for social responsibility and togetherness, across companies, across industries, and across regions. Now all these things are happening simultaneously, and they're all impacting the poor leader at the same time. However, or maybe because of that, we do see that leadership collectively around the world is exhibiting quite a high degree of inertia. The European financial crisis, or the signals of the financial crisis that I just mentioned, they're not new. They've been around for quite some time. Likewise, the signals of the climate change were, yet leadership collectively decided to turn a blind eye and not do anything. Is it surprising that the public is complaining about the absence of leadership? Probably not. So in order to solve the world's So in order to solve the challenges of tomorrow, and in order to drive the necessary levels of innovation, leadership jointly needs to overcome these shared blind spots and exhibit a willingness to collaborate across the different boundaries of the systems that they work in. The leaders need to be able to develop the capability not just to look at their own immediate environment, but also to develop a much larger systems awareness. Against the backdrop of this quantum change, I think we need to redefine what leadership stands for. And I'm not talking about a process change or a skill change. I'm talking about a significant mind shift change that will need to be transported by significantly different behaviors. I believe that the sustainable success of a leader, and therefore of society, to innovate will be driven by the leader's ability to be entrepreneurial, but also to be willing to reflect, to be mindful of others, and to be aware of the fact that one's own behavior has an impact on those around you, whether the leader wants to or not. And I'll share the research of two areas in science with you, because I think that kind of helps hammer in this point. Recent neuroscientific evidence shows that our movement, our speech, and our behavior have an impact on those around us, consciously or not. With the discovery of mirror neurons, you might have heard about that, science can today prove how we are connected to the world, but more importantly, how we are connected to one another. Equally, on the basis of quantum mechanical understanding, some of you might be interested in reading quantum physics, actually it's pretty interesting. We today understand how we are all connected in a unified field, what affects one affects us all. So a leader of tomorrow will need to be inclusive. We need to be capable of building bridges. The leader will need to be willing and able to have the energy to drive social change and focus also on social profit, not just on financial profit. The behavior I'm thinking of will include the display of own vulnerability, we just heard it a couple of moments ago, the admitting of own mistakes, and the acceptance that one does not have all the answers to all the questions all the time. I'm certainly not suggesting that I want an entire generation of leaders to falsely believe that 100% failure is fine, or that having public breakdown after public breakdown is a noble path forward for society. But we do need to more widely share the fact that vulnerability in a leader is actually a sign of strength. That inner doubt is a path forward for growth, and that leadership has an unspoken price that needs speaking. And this behavior will require that the leader embarks upon an inner and an outer journey, and a journey that reaches far beyond the pure IQ of the leader and reaches into what we would call the inner and the outer journey. Let me be a bit more specific here. Now, the outer journey describes the crucible experiences in which leadership are typically formed. In large organizations, they use their funds, their stretch, their scope, their scale, and all that to create an environment in which leaders and future leaders can learn how to manage complex stakeholders or to produce meaningful work. I have no doubt that these large organizations are great at creating the environment for this outer journey. But what about the inner journey? I feel that the hyper-homogeneity that you find in these large organizations, the extreme work pressure and the focus on power make these organizations oftentimes a poor setting for the inner journey. So while the inner journey focuses on challenges and on risks, the inner journey describes how leaders learn through reflection, through mentoring, and through practice. The inner journey is asking from us a sense of contribution, and embarking on this journey means not only to think about ourselves, but to be aware of our behaviors, what our behaviors do on other people. And it's exactly this word, awareness, that lies at the center of the inner journey. In detail, what I think of here is obviously the emotional aspect, by which I mean empathy, social awareness, altruism, mindfulness, learning from failure, and critique. It also includes the intellectual aspect, which means the deep mastery, the creativity, the innovation, passion, and having a worldview. And finally, the social aspect, by which I mean the creation of ecosystems, the building of deep relationships, and the strong ties to the people. Now, all this is nice. It's interesting to talk about the quantum change that is happening, the super problems, the scarcity of resources, but what does it mean for you? What does it mean for you in your current role, on your current level of your life cycle? What does it mean? What does it mean tomorrow? And I'd like to spend the next few minutes on exactly this aspect. What can you do? What can we do to create an ecosystem that is capable of creating sufficiently high levels of collaboration to solve the problem of tomorrow? So by no means is this an exhaustive list. This is just an eye-opener, just a door-opener. So if you think of what you want to do, who you want to stand for, what you want to stand for, what role and what, let's say, philosophy of leadership you want to embark upon, let me give you a couple of my ideas. So let's assume you could create an atmosphere of empathy around you. Let's assume that you could support and praise leaders in your environment, in your organizations, in ISEC, that actually not only intellectually understand this notion of awareness and mindfulness and reflection, but who actually serve as a role model for that. You yourself, you can serve as a role model for the social responsibility aspects in your life. And you can do that in a way that you excite other people to join you or even copy you. You can embrace ambiguity, uncertainty, and complexity because, you know what, they're going to stay. And by being aware of your own limitations, and by acknowledging your own vulnerability, you will create a level of authenticity of yourself that will make it easy for other people to just join in and help you co-design innovation. By creating a safe space around you, you will have a chance to propagate the benefits of the we over the I. Now this also works if you decide to work in the financial sector, or if you decide to be an investor. Let me give you the reason why. Financially supporting a business idea, as a venture capitalist, but also as any other investor, you obviously immediately also support the entrepreneur or the leader behind this idea. And by supporting the entrepreneur or the leader, you automatically also support the philosophy that this person embodies with regard to leadership. This works both ways. Financially supporting an entrepreneur who is striving to create a culture of empathy and respect, who uses feedback and collaboration to really establish a safe space for those around him, this investment will have very strong signals in the market that this investor is operating in. Investing in an entrepreneur, in a business idea, in a leader, on the other hand, who embodies a more rigid, command and control approach to leadership, and who shows little interest in using self-reflection and awareness for the people around him. This investment might still yield a financial profit, but it will probably fall short of its signaling effect to prove to the society the benefits of these new models of leadership. And the last one I would like to turn to is probably the most important one, and it's obviously it's definitely my favorite one, the role that education, the role that government plays in this. Now, when we talk about awareness and mindfulness, of course we can train people at the age of 30, at the age of 40, I'll come to that later. But let me start with early childhood education. Think of parents, think of teachers and caretakers. The incentive systems and the behaviors that parents and caretakers apply to the education of youngest children definitely has an impact on that child's later ability and willingness to be reflective, to be mindful of others, and to be self-aware. Therefore, it's crucial that schools and parents in close collaboration actually expose the child more systematically to learning opportunities that nurture the kids' interest in becoming agile and to deepen the child's sense for collectivism and collaboration. While teachers need to be given the tools and the processes to move seamlessly between the intellectual and the emotional domain, kids need to be given the chance to take an active role in their community, giving them first-hand experiences to the benefits of collaborating with others, being entrepreneurial and curious. The next step, of course, now is moving to schools, universities, or business schools. You guys. Universities and business schools need to more actively put the term of mindfulness on their agenda. They need to spend more time thinking and teaching what it actually means that people are different. What's the notion about psychometric differences? And actually this is important, not only if you're a business major, it doesn't matter what you study, because we're talking about the way that human beings interact with each other. And there's another thing that I think business schools and universities should do much more of. Rather than having the business case on the GEs and the Shells of this world, do the business casing behind social entrepreneurship. Think of and study why these organizations are successful and why can they sustain. For those of you who are not so familiar with the term social entrepreneurship, a typical normal entrepreneur would put financial profit in the center of his attention, while the social entrepreneur puts the social profit at the center of attention, which doesn't mean that the social entrepreneur doesn't make a profit. And then finally, we move up the hierarchy into the organizations. Now there it is crucial that companies, organizations, employers around the world focus and adjust their own incentive systems, their own performance evaluation systems, to also include areas around mindfulness and awareness. That people get promoted based on their ability to think thoroughly about also the human resources at hand. Companies should organize training possibilities where leaders and potential leaders are taken outside their comfort zone to learn what the hell it means to be self-aware, what the hell it means to get feedback and use it to reflect and put that into your own behavior. All this is important, and this is my last slide, all this is important to link. It is important that these three pillars of society actually link up and make sure that there's a pipelining effect, that the impact, that the focus is there on collaboration, on training people, exposing people to this idea of collaborating with each other. So, before closing, and I was just given the 0 minutes page, we are all born with the possibility of becoming a source for innovation, for inspiration, support for other people. Yet, only very few of us actually do that because it takes determination, persistence, time, and energy. So my last wise words to you could be, take time at the end of every day and reflect on how people have actually reacted to you in their interactions with you. Ask them regularly how you have come across in their meetings with you, and use that feedback for the behavior of tomorrow. After all, we're all in this together. Thank you very much for your attention.
So we have just a few minutes for maybe 1 or 2 questions, if anybody has a question for Carsten.
Or critical comments.
You're going to have to shout, and I'll repeat the question. Actually, let me just see if I can find a microphone.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Manuela. You talked about an investor not investing only in the business, but also the entrepreneur and in the underlying mindset of the entrepreneur. Do you think that this is currently a reality and how investment is working and is changing?
It is. It's a great question. It's not reality, let's say, across the board. But if you look at what is happening in some major financial hubs of this world, the investment scene calls that sustainable investment. So there's an incredible push to find companies and leaders that actually not just produce sexy products, but actually organizations that do something which also has a positive kickback effect to society, and while having leaders and entrepreneurs in there that actually help embody this role model behavior. It's a small group. It's I think it's if I remember the numbers correctly from The Economist, it's a $5 billion market, tiny, but growing like crazy. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more comment. Okay, let's can we get the microphone up there, please? If you can put your hand up again, please. Thank you. This is exercise time.
Thanks. This is Jim Rawa from Mexico. In mostly every education system, the schools seem to teach the kids how to think in a very way, in a very particular way. So they kill the creativity on the kids. How could you innovate in order to permit those education systems to teach these kids how to think different out of the box?
I love that question. I don't think of anything else that could be as precise and as targeted as that question. Just Will and I spoke about this on the bus coming here. If you consider the fact that information is publicly available, no matter where you sit, no matter who you are, anybody has the same amount of information. Just Google it. But the quality or the competency to actually take the information and synthesize it, distill it, and use it for something meaningful, something that you need, otherwise you just drown in information. Yet, schools don't teach it. There's an interesting website that I might attract you to called curriculumredesign.org, founded about a year ago by a guy called Charles Fadel, who after many years in the corporate environment, being a statistician, a mathematician, an expert on artificial intelligence, realized that the problems of tomorrow need competencies that the education system of today is not providing. So he started his own organization, and there are some signals, some countries realizing we need to change. You could even go further and say the financial allocation of resources in the education system is the wrong way around. We invest nothing in early childhood and billions into business schools. It should be the other way around, because whatever you whatever you fail to do in the early childhood takes a lot more time and is a lot less likely to succeed later on. Did I answer your question? Thank you, very good. I think we said 2 questions. I'm happy to take questions later on. I'm going to be here, so I want to honor the agenda.
Thank you so much.